The React space is obviously, as a whole, growing really, really fast.
Hmm.
We've been lucky to, really have been one of the first frameworks that was strongly opinionated on this idea of frameworks should, you know, give you all these basics like routing built in,
Hmm.
CSS built in, data fetching built in. Another interesting thing that we did that I think has helped a lot is like multiple pages built in. Like funny enough, like
Hmm.
the very own Create React app, which kind of came out at about the same time that we're about to get Next.js out,
Hmm.
with the substantial difference that we had already been dogfooding Next.js for a year by the
Hmm.
time we put it out. So even Create React App had this idea of like, oh, it's a single page and that's
Yeah.
it, right? And like we had this need of like, funny enough, I always tell the stories like, well, we had this need of 2 pages, like, and the example is we had our terms of service, and
Hmm.
literally this is how our startup started. Like we had 3 pages: homepage, enter your email to be notified of what we're going to be working on,
Hmm.
and then we had the privacy policy and the terms of services. We're taking in user data, we have to have it,
Hmm.
and even though it's just an email, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, all this information, all these static pages are now
Yeah.
going into the bundle that Webpack is outputting.
Hmm.
And when Create React App came out, imagine that you're working on a thing, right? And like you see the very authors of this React component that is so, that's so important to you and to your creation, and you see
Hmm.
them put out a quote unquote competitor to your idea. Well,
Hmm.
you'd probably be, at the very least, a
Worried.
little shocked, worried.
Yeah.
I wasted all this, I wasted this entire year working on this. But for us, it was the opposite. It was like, oh wow, they're putting it out, and we actually disagree strongly on this and that. And we
Hmm.
thought we already lived through this. We already tried to have, that bootstrapping mechanism that it was featuring at the time. Oh, we already tried and discarded that. And not because it's bad, but like, oh, we kept working on our product and so on,
Hmm.
and iterating with the framework, and we found that oh, you can do more and you can do more and you can do more. So what we did is, at that point, I told one of my co-founders now, Yuki, it's like, hey, like, um, let's just take this stuff that we've been using internally and productize it.
Hmm.
And that's how Next.js was born. And it was featuring all these ideas that really resonated with people that were working on products that needed these things to be built in, and like they didn't want to go shopping for options. Like they didn't want
Hmm.
to shop for a router, they wanted to shop for a CSS solution, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's kind of been our advantage, is we got obsessed with this idea of like React should power the entirety of the product and website that
Hmm.
we're creating. And we kind of like had a little bit of a head start, and then we had some strong opinions, and it's worked out really well so far.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing that like it's kind of funny that like it's really funny that you launched right around the same time as Create React App.
Yeah,
Um, like I remember because like so like to me like one of the most amazing things about React when it came out was that it wasn't like one of these frameworks that forced you to
totally,
do everything their way, and you could kind of pick and choose your favorite technologies for each thing. But
totally,
then it's exactly like you're saying. It's the first like week to 2 weeks of any project is like picking your
totally.
framework and setting it up and reassembling the same pieces over and over again.
And also, it fit, React at the time fit the narrative of the time, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Facebook was also going through their own incremental adoption of the technology. I was sharing this with my team the other day. Like, it's interesting to think that no technology gets a free pass. It always has to be evaluated, marketed, presented, pros and cons. And at the time, React was going through that process, right? Like, of course, it already had sufficient buy-in that they were motivated to open source it,
Mm-hmm.
because they have high standards and they wanted to promote a tool that they liked. But it was still going through that process of like, how far can this React thing go? You know? And I remember for me, like a decisive moment was, oh, wow, like Instagram.com, which launched on web, is entirely powered by this thing. You know, so like the trajectory was React, of course, was a V in MVC at the time, and it was powering very specific components. And some were still, you know, for Facebook in the legacy stack, and some, the new ones were creating as React. And it was going through that trajectory. But where we leapfrogged was, well, yes, that makes sense for that kind of incremental adoption for Facebook. And I'm sure also for incremental adoption within, you know, you had a WordPress website and you wanted to add some cool, you know, a reactive component, like drop React in. But then we're like looking ahead, it's like, yeah, but sure, why don't you start with the assumption of React from the get-go? And that's why we kind of started working on Next. And you know, our vision was components are such an amazing primitive and abstraction that, you know, it doesn't matter what you're building, you probably want to build it with React, right? Like I remember one of my kind of like popular tweets at the time was like, it seems to me that we haven't heard about the end of React, nor even the beginning of React yet, because there's so many more places where this component abstraction will make a lot of sense, right? And that kind of predated React VR existing, Inc., which is a project for using React from the command line. Like there's so many places that you can put it, because fundamentally it was a leapfrog in the programming model. And that's what I think makes it so strong, because the component is just, you know, how people think. You know, I've also said, you know, React is the Lego for adults. And and you know, like it is good to think of the world that way. You know,